The Battle for Kandahar: How the War in Afghanistan Changed the World. In the morning of September 11, 2001, the world witnessed an event that would reshape international politics, military strategy, and global security for decades to come. Within a few hours, 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners and turned them into weapons. 2 aircraft slammed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, another struck the Pentagon, and a 4th crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to regain control of the plane. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. The attacks shocked the United States and sent waves of fear across the world. Television broadcasts carried images of collapsing skyscrapers, burning debris, and desperate rescue efforts. Governments everywhere realized that international terrorism had entered a new and far more dangerous phase. American leaders immediately began searching for those responsible. Investigators quickly identified al-Qaeda as the organization behind the attacks. Intelligence reports pointed toward Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden and his network had been operating. Under the protection of the Taliban government, the stage was set for war, yet Afghanistan's role in this story began long before September 11. To understand how the country became the center of the global war on terror, it is necessary to examine the decades of conflict that transformed Afghanistan into one of the most unstable nations on earth. For centuries, Afghanistan occupied a strategic position between Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. Mountain ranges divided communities while trade routes connected distant civilizations. Numerous empires attempted to control the region, but few managed to maintain lasting authority. In 1979, Afghanistan became a battleground in the Cold War. When the Soviet Union launched a military invasion, the Kremlin believed that military intervention would stabilize a communist government facing growing opposition. Instead, the invasion triggered one of the most destructive conflicts of the 20th century. Across the country, resistance groups known collectively as the Mujahideen organized to fight the Soviet occupation. These fighters came from different tribes, regions, and political movements, but they shared a common goal: driving foreign forces out of Afghanistan. The war attracted international attention. The United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and several other countries provided support to the Mujahideen. Weapons, funding, training, and intelligence assistance flowed into Afghanistan. For 10 years, Soviet forces struggled against a determined insurgency. Despite superior equipment and firepower, Soviet troops found it difficult to control Afghanistan's rugged terrain. Mountain valleys became strongholds for resistance fighters. Ambushes and guerrilla attacks constantly disrupted Soviet operations. The human cost was devastating. Millions of Afghans were displaced. Entire villages were destroyed. Infrastructure collapsed. By the time Soviet forces withdrew in 1989, Afghanistan had suffered immense damage. Unfortunately, peace did not follow. After the Soviet withdrawal, various Mujahideen factions began fighting one another for power. The central government weakened, and civil war spread throughout the country. Cities became battlefields, roads became unsafe, ordinary civilians suffered the consequences. Out of this chaos emerged a new movement known as the Taliban. The Taliban originated among religious students and former fighters, many of whom had studied in Islamic schools in Pakistan. They promised stability, order, and an end to the corruption that had plagued Afghanistan throughout the civil war. Their message resonated with many Afghans exhausted by years of violence. During the mid-1990s, Taliban forces expanded rapidly. They captured key cities, transportation routes, and military installations. In September 1996, they entered Kabul and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The Taliban imposed a strict interpretation of Islamic law and rapidly consolidated power across most of the country. That same year, another important figure arrived in Afghanistan: Osama bin Laden. After leaving Sudan, bin Laden relocated to Afghanistan and deepened his relationship with Taliban leaders. Under Taliban protection, al-Qaeda established training camps and operational centers throughout the country. Over the following years, these facilities became a hub for extremist recruitment and planning. The international community expressed growing concern. Al-Qaeda was linked to multiple attacks against American interests, including the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania and the 2000 attack on the USS Cole. Yet the attacks of September 11 surpassed anything the world had previously experienced. In the weeks following 9/11, the United States demanded that the Taliban surrender Osama bin Laden and dismantle terrorist infrastructure. The Taliban refused. American leaders concluded that military action was necessary. On October 7, 2001, Operation Enduring Freedom officially began. Cruise missiles streaked across the night sky while American and British aircraft struck Taliban military facilities, command centers, communication networks, air defenses, and suspected terrorist camps. The objective was clear: destroy al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban from power, prevent Afghanistan from serving as a safe haven for international terrorism. The campaign relied heavily on precision air power. However, airstrikes alone would not be enough to achieve victory on the ground. American planners worked closely with anti-Taliban Afghan forces, particularly the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance had spent years resisting Taliban rule. Although they controlled only limited territory in northern Afghanistan, they possessed experienced fighters and valuable knowledge of local conditions. CIA teams entered Afghanistan before major ground operations began. One of the most famous groups was known as Team JWBRAEK, working alongside Northern Alliance commanders. These operatives gathered intelligence, coordinated resistance activities, and prepared the battlefield for future offensives. Soon afterward, American special forces arrived. Small teams of elite soldiers embedded themselves with Afghan fighters, equipped with advanced communication systems and laser designators. They transformed local units into highly effective combat forces. This combination proved devastating. A handful of special forces soldiers could coordinate airstrikes, capable of destroying entire Taliban defensive positions. The balance of power shifted rapidly. One of the first major objectives was Mazar-i-Sharif. Located in northern Afghanistan, the city served as a strategic transportation hub and a gateway to important supply routes. For years, Taliban forces had controlled the area. In November 2001, Northern Alliance troops launched a major offensive supported by American air power. Bombers targeted Taliban positions around the city. Command centers were destroyed. Defensive lines collapsed. Supply routes were disrupted. On November 9, anti-Taliban forces entered Mazar-i-Sharif. The victory stunned military observers. Many had expected a prolonged battle. Instead, Taliban resistance crumbled under the combined pressure of airstrikes and ground assaults. The capture of Mazar-i-Sharif marked a turning point in the war. It opened critical supply routes and boosted morale among anti-Taliban forces. Perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that the Taliban could be defeated. As news of the victory spread, Taliban fighters began abandoning additional positions across northern Afghanistan. Momentum shifted rapidly. Within days, Northern Alliance units advanced toward Kabul. The Afghan capital had served as the center of Taliban political power since 1996. Many expected fierce resistance. Instead, Taliban leaders decided to withdraw. On November 13, 2001, Northern Alliance forces entered Kabul. The fall of the capital shocked the world. Only weeks earlier, the Taliban appeared firmly entrenched. Now their government was collapsing. Thousands of Taliban fighters and al-Qaeda members retreated southward. Their destination was Kandahar. For the Taliban, Kandahar was more than a city. It was the birthplace of the movement. It was where many senior leaders lived. It was where Taliban founder Mullah Mohammed Omar exercised authority, and it represented the spiritual heart of Taliban power. American commanders recognized Kandahar's significance immediately. If the city could be captured, the Taliban regime would effectively cease to exist. However, the operation presented major challenges. Unlike northern Afghanistan, the south contained fewer anti-Taliban allies. The terrain was difficult, local tribal politics were complex, and Taliban influence remained strong. Nevertheless, plans moved forward. One of the key figures involved in the southern campaign was Hamid Karzai. At the time, Karzai was a relatively unknown tribal leader opposed to Taliban rule. Supported by American special forces, he began rallying local tribes and organizing resistance forces. Taliban commanders viewed him as a serious threat. Several attempts were made to eliminate him, yet American air support repeatedly prevented Taliban attacks from succeeding. Throughout November and early December, pressure on Kandahar increased. Airstrikes targeted Taliban compounds, vehicle convoys, and defensive positions. Special forces coordinated operations across the region. Local allies expanded their influence. Gradually, Taliban control weakened, fighters deserted, commanders lost communication with one another, supply networks deteriorated. By early December, many Taliban leaders recognized that their position was becoming unsustainable. Negotiations began, local agreements were reached, and on December 6, 2001, Kandahar officially fell. The Taliban regime had collapsed. The fall of Kandahar in December 2001 appeared to mark the end of Taliban rule. For the United States and its allies, the campaign had achieved results far faster than many analysts predicted. Within only a few months, the Taliban had lost control of every major city in Afghanistan. Their government had collapsed, their military infrastructure had been severely damaged, and many of their leaders had gone into hiding. Yet one critical objective remained unfinished. Osama bin Laden was still free. American intelligence believed that senior al-Qaeda leaders had retreated into the mountainous region of Tora, Bora in eastern Afghanistan near the Pakistani border. The area consisted of rugged mountains, deep caves, and narrow valleys that made military operations extremely difficult. In December 2001, American forces and Afghan allies launched operations aimed at capturing or killing bin Laden and his followers. Heavy airstrikes pounded suspected al-Qaeda positions. Bombers attacked cave complexes and mountain strongholds. Afghan militias moved through the valleys while American special forces coordinated attacks from the ground. The fighting was intense. Al-Qaeda fighters resisted fiercely, using the terrain to their advantage. They moved through mountain passes, occupied cave systems, and conducted ambushes against advancing forces. Despite the pressure, Osama bin Laden managed to escape. Exactly how he escaped remains a matter of debate. Some reports suggested that he crossed into Pakistan with a small group of loyal followers. Others argued that opportunities to seal escape routes had been missed during the operation. Regardless of the details, one fact was clear: the most wanted man in the world had avoided capture. The escape of bin Laden ensured that the conflict would continue throughout 2002. The United States and its allies focused on rebuilding Afghanistan. A new government was formed under Hamid Karzai, who became the leader of the Afghan Transitional Administration. International aid began flowing into the country. Schools reopened. Roads were repaired. Government institutions were rebuilt. For a brief period, many observers believed Afghanistan was moving toward stability. However, beneath the surface, problems were emerging. Many Taliban fighters who had escaped the initial invasion regrouped in remote areas of Afghanistan and across the border in Pakistan. Rather than attempting to fight conventional battles, they adopted insurgent tactics. Small attacks began to occur. Roadside bombs appeared along highways. Government officials were targeted. Police stations came under assault. Coalition forces initially viewed these incidents as isolated events, but by the mid-2000s, it became increasingly clear that the Taliban were rebuilding. The insurgency expanded year after year. Taliban commanders recruited new fighters, established support networks, and exploited dissatisfaction among parts of the population. Corruption within government institutions, economic challenges, and local grievances created opportunities for insurgent influence. By 2005 and 2006, violence was increasing dramatically. Southern Afghanistan became one of the most dangerous regions in the country. The provinces around Kandahar experienced frequent attacks. Roadside bombs, known as improvised explosive devices or IEDs, became one of the Taliban's most effective weapons. Unlike traditional battles, insurgencies are often wars of endurance. The Taliban understood they could not match NATO's military power directly. Instead, they sought to wear down their opponents over time. For coalition forces, identifying the enemy proved difficult. Taliban fighters often blended into local populations. They avoided large confrontations and focused on surprise attacks. As casualties increased, public support for the war declined in several countries participating in the coalition. Nevertheless, international forces continued operations. Major offensives were launched to secure key areas. Thousands of additional troops arrived. Billions of dollars were invested in development and reconstruction projects, yet lasting stability remained elusive. Kandahar once again became one of the central battlegrounds of the conflict. As the birthplace of the Taliban movement, The city held enormous symbolic importance. Control of Kandahar represented more than military success. It represented political legitimacy. Throughout the late 2000s, coalition forces conducted numerous operations in and around the city. Military commanders hoped to weaken Taliban influence and strengthen local governance. Progress was achieved in some areas. However, insurgent attacks continued. The conflict showed few signs of ending. Then, in 2011, another major event transformed the war. On May 2, 2011, American Special Operations Forces carried out a raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Their target was Osama bin Laden. The operations succeeded. Bin Laden was killed inside a compound where he had been hiding for years. Across the world, news organizations reported the event as a historic moment. Many believed that the death of Al-Qaeda's founder would significantly weaken extremist movements, yet the Taliban remained active. Only days after bin Laden's death, Kandahar became the scene of one of the largest Taliban attacks of the year. On May 7, 2011, insurgents launched coordinated assaults across the city. Government buildings, security checkpoints, police facilities, and administrative offices came under attack. Rocket-propelled grenades exploded near government compounds. Suicide bombers targeted strategic locations. Gun battles erupted throughout the city. The attacks demonstrated that despite years of military pressure, the Taliban remained capable of conducting complex operations. For nearly 2 days, fighting continued. Afghan security forces and coalition troops eventually regained control. Many insurgents were killed, others escaped, but the message was clear: the Taliban were far from defeated. As the years passed, international leaders increasingly searched for a way to end the war. The conflict had become America's longest military engagement. Thousands of coalition personnel had been killed, tens of thousands had been wounded. The financial costs reached hundreds of billions of dollars. At the same time, Afghan civilians continued to suffer. Entire communities were caught between insurgent attacks and military operations. Many families experienced repeated displacement. Economic development remained uneven. Security challenges persisted. Gradually, responsibility for security operations shifted toward Afghan forces. The Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police expanded significantly. Training programs aimed to prepare them for independent operations. The long-term goal was clear: eventually, Afghanistan would be responsible for its own security. However, building an effective national security force proved more difficult than many planners expected. Challenges included corruption, logistical problems, leadership issues, and high casualty rates. Despite years of training and support, many units struggled under pressure. Meanwhile, the Taliban continued adapting. They expanded their influence in rural areas and maintained the ability to threaten major cities. Negotiations eventually became part of the discussion. By the late 2010s, diplomatic efforts intensified. Representatives of the United States and the Taliban met in a series of talks designed to establish a framework for ending the conflict. These discussions eventually resulted in an agreement signed in 2020. The agreement outlined conditions for the withdrawal of American forces. For many observers, it marked the beginning of the final chapter of the war. Yet few anticipated how quickly events would unfold. As foreign troops prepared to leave Afghanistan, the Taliban launched a nationwide offensive. District after district fell under their control. Government positions surrendered. Supply lines collapsed. The balance of power shifted with remarkable speed. The stage was being set for the most dramatic developments since the original invasion of 2001. By the beginning of 2021, Afghanistan stood at a crossroads. For nearly 20 years, the country had been supported by a coalition of international forces led by the United States. Trillions of dollars had been spent. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, aid workers, diplomats, and contractors had participated in the mission. Entire generations of Afghans had grown up knowing nothing but life during the post-Taliban era. Yet beneath the surface, serious problems remained. The Afghan government depended heavily on foreign financial assistance. Many military units relied on American intelligence, logistics, maintenance support, and air power. Corruption continued to weaken public confidence in government institutions. Meanwhile, the Taliban had spent years rebuilding their networks. They maintained influence across large sections of rural Afghanistan and had gradually expanded their presence in districts surrounding major cities. As international troops prepared to leave, Taliban commanders saw an opportunity. Throughout the spring and summer of 2021, Taliban forces launched a massive nationwide offensive. Their strategy was different from previous campaigns. Instead of focusing solely on major cities, they targeted districts, highways, border crossings, and supply routes. The objective was to isolate government forces and undermine their ability to resist. The strategy worked. One district after another fell into Taliban hands. In many areas, Afghan government forces surrendered without significant fighting. Some units lacked supplies. Others felt abandoned. Many soldiers questioned whether reinforcements would arrive if they came under attack. As confidence declined, Taliban momentum increased. Throughout July and August, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Provincial capitals that had remained under government control for years suddenly came under threat. Taliban fighters moved closer to major urban centers, including Kandahar. For the movement, Kandahar remained one of the most important cities in Afghanistan. It was the birthplace of the Taliban. It was where the movement had first risen to prominence in the 1990s. It carried immense symbolic and strategic value. The battle for Kandahar began weeks before the city's final collapse. Afghan security forces attempted to hold defensive positions around the city while Taliban fighters attacked from multiple directions. The fighting was intense. Explosions echoed through neighborhoods. Government buildings came under attack. Roads became dangerous. Thousands of civilians found themselves trapped in the middle of the conflict. Hospitals struggled to cope with casualties. Families fled their homes in search of safety. The humanitarian situation worsened with each passing day. As the Taliban tightened their grip around the city, Afghan forces faced mounting challenges. Ammunition became scarce. Supply routes were disrupted. Air support was limited. Morale declined. Many soldiers had been fighting for years with little hope that the war would end. Some units continued resisting despite overwhelming pressure. Others retreated. Some surrendered altogether. By early August, the outcome was becoming increasingly clear. Taliban fighters entered large sections of Kandahar and gradually took control of critical government facilities. The city's defenses collapsed. After nearly 2 decades of conflict, the Taliban had recaptured one of Afghanistan's most important cities. The fall of Kandahar was not an isolated event. Across the country, similar scenes were unfolding. Major cities that had remained under government control for years were falling at an astonishing pace. The Afghan National Army, despite years of training and billions of dollars in support, was struggling to maintain cohesion. International observers watched in disbelief. Many had expected the Afghan government to survive for months or even years after the withdrawal of foreign troops. Instead, its collapse accelerated dramatically. As provincial capitals fell, attention shifted toward Kabul. The capital city remained the political heart of Afghanistan. If Kabul fell, the government would almost certainly cease to exist. On August 15, 2021, that prediction became reality. Taliban forces entered Kabul. Government institutions collapsed. President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan effectively came to an end. The Taliban once again became the rulers of Afghanistan. For many people around the world, the images were shocking. Crowds gathered at Kabul International Airport hoping to leave the country. Thousands of civilians desperately searched for evacuation flights. Scenes of chaos dominated international news coverage. The withdrawal marked the end of America's longest war. The conflict had lasted approximately 19 years and 10 months. The human cost was enormous. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. Among them were Afghan civilians, Afghan security personnel, Taliban fighters, coalition soldiers, journalists, aid workers, and countless others caught in the violence. Millions more experienced displacement, injury, or psychological trauma. Entire communities were transformed by decades of warfare. The financial costs were equally staggering. The United States alone spent trillions of dollars on military operations, reconstruction efforts, humanitarian assistance, and support for Afghan institutions. Despite these investments, many of the gains achieved during the war proved difficult to sustain after the withdrawal. For Afghanistan, the challenges did not end when the fighting subsided. The country entered a new period of uncertainty. Economic difficulties intensified. International aid declined. Banking systems faced severe disruptions. Many families struggled to secure food, healthcare, and employment. Humanitarian organizations warned of growing crises across multiple regions. Women and girls faced significant restrictions under Taliban rule. Educational opportunities became more limited. Employment prospects narrowed. International human rights organizations expressed concern about the future of civil liberties in the country. Ethnic and religious minorities also faced uncertainty. Political opposition largely disappeared. Many former government officials and activists either fled Afghanistan or went into hiding. At the same time, Taliban leaders argued that they had restored stability after decades of war. Supporters pointed to reduced levels of large-scale fighting and improved security in some areas. Critics countered that political freedoms and human rights had suffered dramatically. The debate continues today. Looking back, historians often describe the Afghanistan War as one of the defining conflicts of the 21st century. It began with the attacks of September 11, 2001. It led to the overthrow of the Taliban government. It expanded into a long and costly counterinsurgency campaign. And ultimately, it concluded with the Taliban's return to power nearly 20 years later. Few conflicts illustrate the complexity of modern warfare more clearly. Military victories on the battlefield did not necessarily translate into lasting political success. Advanced technology, overwhelming firepower, and international support proved capable of removing a government, but building a stable and self-sustaining political system proved far more difficult. The story of Kandahar reflects that reality. In 2001, the city represented the collapse of Taliban rule. Its capture symbolized victory for the United States and its allies. Yet 2 decades later, Kandahar became a symbol of the Taliban's return. The same city that marked the movement's downfall also witnessed its resurgence. For veterans who fought in Afghanistan, the memories remain deeply personal. For Afghans who lived through decades of conflict, the consequences continue to shape everyday life. And for the world, the war serves as a reminder of the challenges involved in combating terrorism, rebuilding nations, and achieving lasting peace. More than 20 years after the first American bombs fell on Afghanistan, the questions raised by the conflict remain relevant. How do wars truly end? Can military power alone create political stability? What lessons should future generations learn from Afghanistan? The answers continue to be debated by historians, military leaders, policymakers, and ordinary citizens alike. What is certain, however, is that the battle for Kandahar and the broader Afghanistan war changed the course of modern history. Its legacy will be studied for decades to come, from the rise of the Taliban in the 1990s to their dramatic return in 2021. Afghanistan's story remains one of resilience, tragedy, conflict, and transformation. And even today, the final chapter has yet to be written.